as you just heard in that interview with Aaron, that it was an Islamic Jihad rocket from within Gaza. Israeli-Palestinian journalist and foreign policy analyst Rula Jabral joins us now. She also has loved ones both in Israel and in East Jerusalem. Rula, thank you for being here on a day where there's just such a significant turn of events. The fact that Mahmoud Abbas pulled out of a planned meeting with President Biden, then it was just canceled. He will, we understand, speak on the phone on the way back from Israel with President el-Sisi and also King Abdullah. Why do you think that this was canceled, and what is the significance of them not meeting face to face?
Good morning, Poppy. I think it's very significant. I think three leaders in the region, Israel ally, America's allies, the biggest recipients of military aid from the U.S., both Egypt and Jordan and the Palestinian Authority, canceling together want to send a signal to the Americans, especially to this administration. We told you, without a political solution, we will be here. They've been warning the administration. They were begging and pleading with the administration to intervene, not now, but even last year when the event around the Aqsa Mosque were happening, where, during Ramadan, people were being attacked and harassed by both settlers and the army. I think Arab leaders are frustrated because they see the same approach by the Israelis, backed by the Americans, that this conflict can be managed and can be in any way contained without a political solution, which they indicate as the main reason why we are here at the fifth round. This is the fifth war in Gaza.
Right.
They are deeply frustrated. They are very angry because they feel ignored.
Rula, we heard President Biden say this morning, quote, "We have to also bear in mind that Hamas does not represent all of the Palestinian people and has brought them only suffering." Do you think that there is anything President Biden can do on the ground and Israel can say when we hear from him shortly that will prevent this from spreading into a far more grave regional conflict?
I think yes, and I think there's the real question is, this is going to become an American war absent a political solution. President Biden can relaunch the initiatives that the Arabs themselves suggested to the Americans in 2002, the Arab Initiative, recognizing Israel in exchange of ending military occupation of the West Bank that had been lasting for 57 years, Poppy. And, if he could put on the table not only ceasefire, humanitarian aid, but some political initiative, meaning we now really want to empower the Palestinian Authority that recognize Israel, that cooperate on security with Israel. I mean, Abbas yesterday, people marched in Ramallah asking for his, they want him gone because they feel that Abbas never delivered to them. So I think President Biden can salvage the situation by proposing, by saying something about an eventual political solution that needs to happen now, not before the military operation ends, but now, simultaneously. Exactly like Rabin, when Prime Minister Rabin used to be Prime Minister of Israel, he used to say that he has double-track strategy: negotiate and settle politically while fighting extremists.
Rula, you have emphasized the critical importance, especially in the media, of making it extremely clear the distinction between the civilians, Palestinian civilians who live in Gaza, and Hamas. This is something that struck me that we heard from President Biden earlier this morning. Listen.
Palestinians who are innocent, caught in the middle of this. The world's looking. Israel has a value set like the United States does and other democracies, and they're looking to see what we're going to do.
The world is watching, and Israel has a value set that reflects the value set of America, is what he is saying. Why is it crucial to hear that from him in this moment while he's there, sitting next to Netanyahu?
I think President Biden heard also Israeli military on American television, and also leaders blur the distinction, especially the President Herzog, who is a moderate, or viewed as moderate, saying there's no civilians, meaning, and this is why a lot of people don't believe what happened in Gaza, because precisely of these statements that there's no civilians in Gaza. The army, I believe a military official 2 days ago on CNN said we're not fighting Hamas, but we're fighting civilians. So these kind of statements complicate President Biden's vision, but also in the eyes of Palestinians and the wider region, the people who are protesting in Jordan, in Turkey, in Egypt, they're telling us, we look at the statements and the deeds of the Israelis and we don't believe what happened. Also, they indicate and they are telling us, look, it happened in 1996 when Israel struck UN compound in Lebanon. They said it was Hezbollah, and then it turned out that it was Israel. So they point out to these statements and they jump to a conclusion, and this sadly can become an America's war. And this is what President Biden, I think, is trying to prevent.
Lula Jabral, so appreciate your perspective and your analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we are continuing our team coverage of a very volatile and consequential day in the Middle East, but we're also keeping an eye on Washington. If at first you don't succeed, you can try again and again and again. Jim Jordan heads to the House floor again, where he'll be facing a second vote for Speaker this afternoon. We'll have the latest.
Dozens of rockets coming in here. Those interceptions right above us.
We have been hearing repeated exchanges of gunfire.
You can see the scale of the destruction.
If you know anything about what they do to people in Gaza, that is worse than death.
My children and grandchildren experienced a living hell. How difficult is this fight going to be on the ground?
We have no other place to go.
Breaking news coverage continues live from Israel.
I was put on earth to work here. I don't have hobbies. I don't believe in weekends. The only thing I love more than emails and spreadsheets is meetings about emails and spreadsheets. So when do I start?
Ever wonder where the people with all the answers get all the answers? Ask Markham, accountants and advisors.
You're giving me a good feeling.
We tell the stories that matter most.
You're giving me a good feeling. Yes, you do.
When Lila was ready to sell her ring, she sent it to Worthy, where they took care of everything and auctioned it on her terms. Then, Worthy sent Lila her money. You're worthy of more. Get started at worthy.com.
Why pay over $100 a month for cable when it's half the cost for Fubo TV? Get all the channels you want with all the entertainment you love for the price that cable can't beat. Try free at FuboTV.com.
I'm Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon, and this is CNN.
It's a beautiful day in Washington, unless you're a member of the House Republican Conference. In just a few hours, we think we're going to have round two for Congressman Jim Jordan in the speaker race. It has been more than 2 weeks now since they've had an elected speaker. The Ohio lawmaker will be facing his second vote. He lost the first vote yesterday after 20 of his fellow Republicans voted against him. The late night shows having a bit of a field day with it.
Republicans couldn't agree on the Speaker of the House. They were unable to elect Jim Jordan. Yeah. They did this once before with Kevin McCarthy, where it took 15 votes to get elected. So only 14 more rounds to go. Hang in there, Jim. You can do it, Jimbo.
Joining us now, CNN political commentator Philosopher Griffin. She was a former White House communications director to Donald Trump, also a former spokesperson for the Freedom Caucus.
And Jim Jordan.
And Jim Jordan.
Does he like that nickname? I don't think he likes that nickname.
I don't think you probably never called him that. So, honestly, to cut straight to it, I want to know how this. My sense last night from talking to folks on the Hill is that he was actually bleeding more support. Didn't seem like it was going to head in his direction. So what happens now?
Yeah, Jim Jordan's facing a tremendous uphill battle. I would expect to see more defections when they take this to the floor later today. But his team says they're still in it. They've been trying to wrangle with some of the moderate members, see if there's some deals that can be cut. But here's the thing: is I think for a lot of the moderates, sure, there's some personal animus for Jim Jordan, but he to them is sort of reflective of the obstructionism that they've seen in the House that has brought the conference to a screeching halt. Even though Jim himself supported McCarthy, they see him as part of what created the Matt Gaetzes of the world. I would suspect this goes to a vote. I don't see how they are there. But the reality is no Republican has 217 votes in the House. I'm hearing from more members that actually extending Patrick McHenry's powers as Speaker Pro Tem is more likely to happen.
But remember, Hakeem Jeffries has had positive things to say about McHenry as well. I mean, you need Democrats, right, to be able to do this until one of the proposals from a Republican was till November 17th, right? Keep the government open. What would that actually look like?
It's really just about like keeping the lights on, the functioning, having committee work continue, and of course you've got about 30 days out to deal with government funding. Patrick McHenry's generally liked. He's a lot more of just sort of a legislative wheeler and dealer than a showman. He's not a right-wing firebrand by any means. So I think that may end up being where we go, because take Jim Jordan out of this. There's not someone you put up, Byron Donalds might throw his name in, Elise Stefanik. Those votes are not there. This just underscores how broken the House Republican Conference is. It's all coming to a head, but this does test the theory that conservatives, myself included, probably 10 years ago, had, that perhaps if we put up one of the most conservative members, we could get the House in order, could run the way that we promised our voters. That does not exist. You cannot have 20 people or 18 who won Biden districts and also keep the Matt Gaetzes and the Freedom Caucus guys happy. There's got to be somebody in the middle that people can support, but it doesn't exist.
The beauty of Jim Jordan having to rely on trying to make backroom deals with moderates to become Speaker of the House, it knows no bounds. I think more broadly, with the time we have left, does this actually matter in terms of politically, in terms of where 2024 is headed? You hear from DCCC and all Democrats, this shows everything. This is the perfect contrast. Does this resonate?
I think it matters for the House. I think if you're a Mike Lawler, you're a Don Bacon, you're somebody in a swing district, it's really hard to make the case that you should be reelected which, by the way, both of those men I think should be reelected, but when the conference doesn't even work, when Congress has basically been at a standstill for 2 days, I think it jeopardizes the House majority. Doesn't have bigger bearings than that. Donald Trump endorsed Jim Jordan. That still didn't get him the numbers. But it does jeopardize the House Republican majority in a very big way. And by the way, if I may say, this all happening while America's closest ally in the Middle East is at war. It's so unserious. It is petty. It is something that just needs to be resolved.
It's shocking to me that this moment has not apparently changed the willingness to give here to get a speaker.
If Israel
Are you surprised by that?
Yes, if Israel coming under a terrorist attack and being in a state of war with Hamas is not a sobering moment where we
Biden's there. The U.S. president is there.
It's the juxtaposition is stunning. It's just unserious is the best word I can come up with. And by the way, the House Republican Conference is still largely, by and large, pro-Israel. So you would think this would be a moment to stand up. That's why I think it ends up likely going to a McHenry.
Just keeping the lights on. That is the type of aspirational goals we want our lawmakers to pursue. Alyssa, thank you, as always. And CNN This Morning continues right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
It is the top of the hour. We're so glad you're with us on this breaking news this morning. I'm Poppy Harlow with Phil Mattingly in New York. Aaron Burnett, Clarissa Ward, Caitlin Collins, all live in Israel, where President Biden is on the ground right now, vowing to support Israel as its war with Hamas takes quite a turn. Outrage and protests across the Arab world after the explosion at a hospital in Gaza that killed hundreds of innocent civilians. Officials in Gaza claim it was an Israeli airstrike. The Israeli military insists it was a misfired rocket launched by Palestinian militants right near the hospital. CNN has geolocated, look at this video. This is the moment of the blast. This morning, President Biden appearing to take Israel's side. Listen to the president.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things.
Now, shortly before President Biden landed in Israel, the Israeli military laid out evidence blaming the explosion on the Islamic Jihad militant group, including intercepted audio of Hamas operatives allegedly talking about the misfired rocket. Despite Israel's denials, a wave of anti-Israel, anti-American, pro-Palestinian protests have erupted across the Middle East. In Lebanon, hundreds of protesters tried to break through security barriers near the U.S. Embassy. Police fired tear gas and water cannons to drive them away.
We have team coverage across Israel and across the region. Aaron Burnett joins us live in Tel Aviv. Aaron, President Biden, has flown into an incredibly volatile situation and a very different set of meetings than he expected even 24 hours ago.
Certainly very different, right? He was thinking that he would be able to meet with both Israelis and the Arab countries at the center of this, Mahmoud Abbas, King Abdullah of Jordan, as well as al-Sisi of Egypt. That meeting, of course, canceled. And obviously, I know, Caitlin is with the president, and we'll talk about what actually he can achieve, but it is these protests across the region that have now risen the stakes. The stakes have gone up, and those protests are going to continue even today in Tunisia during the day. They started last night around 11 p.m. Eastern in Beirut, in Amman, in Baghdad. We have seen them, and as you say, Phil, they are anti-Israel. They are pro-Palestine. And they are increasingly, in some cases, also anti-American, which is just proof of how closely President Biden is now tied to this. Of course, historically, of course, always in perception, but showing up at this moment and only meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu with that great embrace certainly adds to an image that the United States, as Biden says, has Israel's back and is inextricably linked to whatever Israel does next. And as we're waiting on Biden to speak, Caitlin, that is what's at stake. And I know he's been in these closed-door meetings, made some comments in between. Where are we in his meetings right now?
Yeah, just to remind everyone what has transpired here since President Biden got on the ground, which he's only been here for a few hours. He's only going to be here in total for a few hours. This is not a very lengthy trip for him. Right now, he is still meeting with the wartime cabinet. That is that new cabinet that has been formed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. They, of course, are talking one thing that the president came here to find out, which is what Israel's objectives are going to be in this war. What is it going to look like if Israel does go into Gaza? What are their stated goals? Those were the tough questions that the White House said President Biden was going to have for his friend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while he's here on the ground. We'll see what that looks like. But of course, the other thing that is complicated, what was already a challenging trip for this White House, is that explosion at the hospital in Gaza. And just to set the scene for our viewers, it had not been that long that President Biden had been here on the ground. He had greeted Prime Minister Netanyahu, he had embraced him in a hug, and then he came here, and almost one of his first remarks was about that explosion, where he embraced Israel's denials. He said that based on what he has seen, he said it was, quote, the other team, not you. And when he said not you, obviously that was a reference to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was sitting next to him. We know the IDF has blamed a Palestinian militant group for this, a terrorist group. That is who they say is to blame. Of course, authorities in Gaza have said it is the Israeli Defense Forces that is to blame. That is something that Israel has strongly denied here. And President Biden siding with Israel in that. Now, we've asked the White House, is it evidence that he saw? What was it that made him buy into those denials? They have not yet clarified that statement, but it is an important one that he was making. And then, of course, Netanyahu himself later denied it. That is an undertone, though, for this entire trip, because as you noted, it has changed what this trip is going to look like. There is no follow visit to Jordan. And I should note, you can see a lectern here behind me. President Biden will be here once he finishes up with his meetings today, making remarks, and we'll see, of course, what is the culmination of this historic visit of, which I should note, Netanyahu said he's the first U.S. president to ever visit Israel while Israel was at war.
All right, and of course we're going to await that. Caitlin is in the room, and we'll hear it and bring all of that to us. Well, the blast on the hospital in Gaza that has disrupted this trip and changed the trajectory of this story, sparking mass protests across the region and raising huge question marks about where this goes from here. In Jordan, local security forces were seen using tear gas to disperse huge crowds. Those crowds were gathering near the Israeli embassy. That was in Amman. I want to go to our chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward, in Ashkelon, south of here in Israel. And Clarissa, this tragic blast at the hospital in Gaza, and history, of course, will show what other points come, but at this moment, this is an inflection point in this war.
It is an inflection point. I think that the hope of President Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken was that they were going to be able to announce some kind of a tangible deliverable in terms of humanitarian aid, opening up a corridor, opening up potentially humanitarian zones, as Blinken had talked about. there is no longer a strong sense that that's going to be imminently feasible. The fact that President Biden has had his meetings with the Egyptian leader, with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, and also with the Jordanian king canceled means it becomes all the more challenging to see how on earth there can be any kind of consensus built around how to deal with the humanitarian catastrophe that is playing out in Gaza. And as the world is kind of arguing back and forth, he said, she said, and finger pointing, I do think it bears reminding our viewers that the situation there is at absolute crisis point. The hospitals are no longer functioning. We have been talking to doctors who are performing operations without anesthesia. We have been talking to aid workers to the UN who say no water, no electricity, only enough food to potentially last 4 or 5 more days. The UN says 600,000 people displaced from their homes in northern Gaza in the last, since Friday, since the announcement was made by Israelis that people in northern Gaza should leave their homes. Meanwhile, you've seen strikes continuing in southern Gaza, making it frightening for people to leave their homes because they don't feel that there's anywhere where they can find refuge or respite. And I would say now we hear strikes continuing throughout the day. Very little prospect from any side on kind of budging on sitting down at the table and taking a collective deep breath and trying to work together to deliver something in the form of respite for the people who are trapped in there. Many foreign nationals also trapped in there, I should add. The U.S. Embassy in Cairo estimates more than 250 Americans who have been camped out by that Rafah border crossing now, Aaron, for days on end, trying desperately to get out. But with the situation, with these inflamed tensions, with these protests, of course you have to take into account that for Arab leaders right now, it is very difficult to sit down and meet with President Biden if they can't offer some guarantee or something that they can then show to their people and say, look, see, we are fighting for the Palestinians as well. So it becomes a really complex issue, a very dangerous potential inflection point, and the risk, as always, as we have talked about many times with this conflict, of this becoming a broader regional conflagration, Aaron.
Yes, and Clarissa's talking about those explosions, and you see the smoke over Gaza, just to show it again, and we continue to show it when we see it so that everyone understands the constant state of bombardment that Gaza is under. Clarissa talked about some of those Americans, one of them in touch with her family whenever she can, and even given the power issues at a place like the UN compound, sometimes it's once every 24 hours, saying that, looking at where we are right now, that would be 2 days of water left, and that's at the UN. To give you a sense of the fact that this isn't just a humanitarian crisis, it is a humanitarian crisis that could become something even bigger and even worse, and we are hours away. Something must be done. And Clarissa Ward, thank you so much in Ashkelon. Phil, back to you.
Yeah, and Aaron, and Clarissa mentioning the acute difficulty, complexity that comes on the diplomatic side of things right now between the president and those canceled meetings with Arab leaders. An accelerant to that difficulty, that complexity, obviously, was the blast at the hospital in Gaza. Now, at this moment in time, we have seen from the IDF their rationale for why they were not responsible. Obviously, you've seen the protests as well of people in the Arab world that don't believe that. CNN has now geolocated video that shows the moment of the deadly hospital blast in Gaza. Now, I'm going to pull it up here because as you can see, as this video plays, the sky, it lights up as a large blast erupts right there on the hospital grounds. It sends a huge cloud of smoke in the air. Now, it's important to note, CNN at this point cannot independently verify what caused the blast. We're still working on that, but I do want to bring in CNN military analyst, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, here with me at the Magic Wall. When you see that in isolation, one of the things we have heard repeatedly from officials that are pointing to the IDF say no rocket could make an explosion that big. What do you see there?
Well, first, what I'll start off by saying, Phil, is I've heard the expression fog of war about 100 times so far this morning. Excuse me. I'm not a bomb analyst, neither are you, but what you see here is a very large fire explosion. That's not usually something that comes with a guided bomb from an aircraft. What it seems to be, and this is just really conjecture on my part, is a rocket that still has fuel on board. That's the indicator. the fuel propellant that pushes a rocket forward. When it hit the ground, the rocket exploded like they always do when they hit, but there was a lot of fuel in that rocket too because it had fallen out of the sky. So you see a very large blast, a fiery blast, in a parking lot.
So to this point, and I think this has been one of the pieces of information that we've heard from IDF officials and their view or their the evidence they're presenting, which the President Biden, seems to agree with at this point, and that is what you're saying right now, the trajectory, right? What they're showing based on their radar footage, these are rocket launches or rocket strikes headed towards Israel, and this is where the hospital was. So the idea that this was a malfunction of some sort, how often does that happen? Is that something that happens with regularity?
With the kind of rockets that Hamas has or the Jihadist Union has, yes, it happens a lot. They are shipped primarily from Iran. They're not good rockets. There are 4 different types. They go different distances. There are a lot of rocket failures, and Israel has said they have seen a lot of rocket failures, over 400 of them so far. So when you see one fall out of the sky like that, it's because the engine cuts off. They are not precision rockets. They're fired out of the back of literally a box. So in this particular one, you see a series of rockets coming out of a point of origin. That's where the rockets allegedly were fired from. There are about 6 or 7 lines. That means they're going in different trajectories. This is the one that's right over the hospital. And there's another film of a rocket going up, the engine cutting off, and then seconds later you see that explosion on the ground that you just showed.
The other issue, and I think this is one that that struck me, and because you've heard the IDF officials talk about it a lot, is the craters, right? Yeah. The location of where the rocket landed or where the explosion happened, and the scale of both where it hit compared to the hospital, not on the hospital directly, but also what it created or what the kind of blast radius was compared to Israeli footage showing, this is what a crater is supposed to look like in one of our strikes. This does not have that.
Yeah.
Does that track for you?
It does. This is the hospital building, right? As a satellite imagery. This is a parking lot. When we see the cars in that parking lot, most of them are burned. Not all of them. There's not kind of the blast that you would expect from a very large bomb like that coming off an aircraft. It looks more like a lot of fire, a lot of burning, some shrapnel against the building. Again, this is a parking lot. That's the explosion outside. So evidence seems to indicate, and these are facts that don't counter emotions. What we've been seeing back and forth all morning long is the emotions on both sides. Hey, we've got the facts versus the opinion. That's warfare. Unfortunately, that's what always happens in war. You have to contend with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the big questions President Biden will face after he's done with his meetings when he comes to speak, if he takes any questions during his remarks, is what made him conclude, based on these issues that you're laying out, whether U.S. intelligence has an assessment, we don't know yet.
I would venture to say that U.S. intelligence has additive intelligence to what
this, and we know that they had obtained, or the Israelis had passed over their intelligence as well. Lieutenant General Mark Hartley, appreciate it. Thank you. Bobby?
So with us now at the desk, editor and foreign affairs columnist for Bloomberg, Bobby Ghosh. Bobby, thanks very much for being here. I want to start with something that we just heard from our one of our foreign policy analysts, Rula Jabral, who has so much experience in the region. She said, this sadly could become America's war. This is what President Biden is trying to prevent. What do you think when you hear that as he's there?
Well, certainly that will be the perception of a lot of people that we've seen in the street scenes that you've been showing in the past couple of hours, that will be the perception, the fact that Biden's there at this moment, that he seems to be giving Israel, the perception is that he's giving Israel cover to do what happened last time, even if that is not the president's intention. That it will be seen as America's war, but Biden has the opportunity to make it America's peace.
How?
If he can lean into Netanyahu, that private conversation they're having as we speak here, off camera, and persuade Netanyahu to hold off on a ground offensive, to allow humanitarian aid go in, it might just, it's still a very, very heavy lift, but it might just show that the United States is not there just to back up Israel, but also try to bring a resolution to the conflict, to give the people of Gaza a break.
To get that humanitarian aid in, yes, you need Israel for some of the crossings. You also need Egypt.
Yes, but Egypt waiting. We've also seen images of those convoys of humanitarian aid waiting at the border. Egypt's made it clear they're not going to take these people. They're not going to take the Palestinian refugees, but they're ready to help. And the United States has been leaning on Egypt to help. Now, it's up to Israel substantially to allow that possibility to take a break from the shelling of Palestinian targets, to allow people to leave or to allow aid to come in. That's basically, I suspect, what Biden's pushing for right now. Whether he can persuade Bibi Netanyahu is another question. The blood is up in Israel for very good reasons. People are still reeling from the shock of what happened 2 Saturdays ago. The images, even now, there are fresh images emerging of what those Hamas people did, those terrorists did when they were in southern Israel.
Why?
Israelis are seeing those images and they want something to be done about it, which is not an unreasonable position to take.
And that's exactly what we have been hearing all morning from Aaron in Tel Aviv, from Clarissa in Ashkelon, a real need among the Israeli people for vengeance, for revenge, for what happened to them, for this attack. Why would Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hold back from that?
Every instinct that he has will be telling him not to hold back, to, on the contrary, to lead into the fight, to send in those ground troops. That's why it's such a heavy lift for Biden. Biden's going to have to press him, perhaps using the example of what happened in this country, our response to 9/11, and then the problem of going into Afghanistan without a long-term plan. Biden's going to have to use the United States as a cautionary tale rather than as an example of what to do. It has to be an example of what not to do after you've been hit by such a horrific act of terror.
Bobby Ghosh, thank you for the analysis.
Anytime.
Thanks.
President Biden remains behind closed doors with Israel's war cabinet, but he is expected to speak with victims of last week's Hamas attacks, as well as families of hostages still held by Hamas after that meeting. They're desperately searching for answers about their loved ones. We're going to speak to a man whose son is one of the 14 Americans who remain unaccounted for. That's next.
This is American infrastructure, a prime target for cyber attacks. But the same AI-powered security that protects all of Google also defends these services for everyone who lives here.
How do you make a blood pressure support tube from the #1 selling beet brand even more effective and more delicious? By making it with grapes. That's right, super grapes, supercharged with CoQ10 and a powerful grapeseed extract for nearly 2 times more effective blood pressure support than diet and exercise alone. Discover super grapes with CoQ10, 2-in-1 heart support, all in one irresistible chew. Get a free month supply at supergrapes.com.
Fresh warm hot dogs. When I'm not selling hot dogs, I invest in a fund that advances innovations like robotics. Fresh warm hot dogs straight out of my torso. One for you, one for you. Oh, you're a messy one. Cool, right?
Anyone can become an agent of innovation with Invesco QQQ, a fund that gives you access to NASDAQ 100 innovations.
Hot dogs. Fresh warm hot dogs.
Before investing, carefully read and consider fund investment objectives, risk, charges, expenses, and more. Prospectus at Invesco.com.
Confused by the Medicare ABCs? If you have Original Medicare, then you have Parts A and B. Have you considered Part C? Medicare Part C is sometimes known as a Medicare Advantage plan, and it's one of the best ways to help protect yourself from out-of-pocket Medicare costs. If you only have Medicare Parts A and B, there are 3 things you should do. 1. Call the number on your screen. 2. Give the licensed insurance agent your zip code. 3. See what Part C plans with benefits are available to you. 1, 2, 3. It's that easy. Medicare Part C plans are available with benefits you may not be receiving with your current plan. Call now to enroll during the Medicare annual enrollment period. There may be a plan available in your area with benefits, but you won't know unless you 1. Call the number on your screen now. 2. Give the licensed insurance agent your zip code. 3. See what Part C plans with benefits are available to you. Medicare Part C plans are available now. Plans may include benefits you are not currently receiving. Call today. You don't get a new Medicare Advantage plan automatically. Call now to enroll during the Medicare annual enrollment period. If you already have a plan, call to find out if any changes have been made to your coverage for 2024. If you only have Medicare Parts A and B, there are 3 things you should do. 1. Call the number on your screen. 2. Give the licensed insurance agent your zip code. 3. See what Part C plans with benefits are available to you. 1, 2, 3. It's that easy. Medicare Part C plans are available with benefits you may not be receiving with your current plan. The Medicare Benefit Helpline is accepting calls right now to see what 2024 plans with benefits are available to you. Everyone on Medicare can call today for a free Medicare benefits review. The call is free. There's no obligation.
Call 800-375-1200. That's 800-375-1200. 800-375-1200. Call now.
With President Biden on the ground reaffirming U.S. support for Israel and Tel Aviv, the families of the hostages held by Hamas continue the agonizing wait for updates on their loved ones. Our next guest spoke to President Biden last week about his son, Sagi Dekolchen. He's one of the 14 Americans who remain unaccounted for following the Hamas terror attack. His family says Sagi was last seen on October 7th after rushing his pregnant wife and 2 daughters into a bomb shelter while they attempted to guard his kibbutz near the Gaza border. Joining us now, Sagi's father, Jonathan Dekolchen. He's a history professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Jonathan, we appreciate your time. You spoke to President Biden last week, and afterwards you said you were proud to, the conversation made you proud to be an American. What do you want to hear from the president today when he speaks in Tel Aviv?
Well, I would hope that when he's speaking today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that there'll be a renewed commitment and, rock solid commitment that I believe that the president has to doing everything possible while Israel pursues its other war aims to keep the hostages as safe as possible and to do everything that can be done within this ongoing conflict to get them home safely, or at the very least, show some signs of life for everyone but one of these hostages. It's important for us, I think I can speak here for all of the hostages, Americans and all of the other nationalities, Israelis included, that we understand what needs to be done with Hamas overall, but we absolutely need for the well-being of our loved ones to be prioritized. We know that's true for President Biden, and it would be good to get some reassurance from our own government.
We're looking at pictures while we talk to you, Jonathan, of Sagi, your son, and he and his wife are parents to a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, as I understand it. She's also pregnant with the 3rd daughter, and they endured horror, absolute horror, during that attack for the better part of 20 hours. And I wonder, just obviously, you are comforting them through this time, but how are they coping?
Well, my daughter-in-law and her 2 beautiful little girls are like all of the other survivors from our kibbutz, and I imagine all of the other border communities. They're utterly traumatized. They experience death right outside their door. They heard their father, their husband, in hand-to-hand combat with Hamas terrorists. When they walked out that door, they saw bodies everywhere, and the kibbutz around them, this cooperative farm, burnt to the ground. I guess they're doing as well as they can. The community, of course, is rallying around them. They're strong, but it's kind of incomprehensible between the unknowns about their father and the fact that all of us have no homes to go back to, nor any property. Everything's looted from our kibbutz, from the smallest toys to the largest tractors.
I think incomprehensible is such a kind of perfect word to describe the horrors and the experiences, because I don't think anybody could ever imagine that this could happen, at least broadly, on the ground. Is this something you could have ever foreseen?
Even in my worst dreams, to be honest, as I've been part of the security team, civilian security team, and that's really important to emphasize. These border communities it's a bunch of farmers. These are civilians. We did have security teams, civilian security teams, because we live in a hostile region with a terrorist organization that is the government in the Gaza Strip. But this sort of scenario was never, ever on the table. And in any case, the army, our army, the IDF, was supposed to come and relieve us after a few minutes of engaging terrorists, and it took 9 hours. In our kibbutz, there are different counts, but we're about in the middle. 9 hours of the destruction of our community, the murder of dozens, and the abduction of dozens more back to Gaza.
Jonathan, it was just a couple of years ago that you wrote this in the Times of Israel. This was during several days of unrest that left hundreds dead. You wrote, "For the sake of my children and the children of Gaza, I hope for peace in their lifetimes, even if the past 2 decades of bloodshed make optimism difficult." What about now? Do you hang on to that hope even now?
I hang on to that hope because there's no alternative. I don't want my grandchildren. I've kind of given up on my children, but I have 10 wonderful grandchildren, some of them deeply traumatized right now. I can't give up hope, but what I do know is that my family and the country as a whole and the people of Gaza overall will have not even a chance, not even a remote chance of peace as long as Hamas remains the governing authority in Gaza. And so just for the sake of hope, if anyone had any doubt before this past Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago that Hamas was anything other than a savage terrorist organization set on only murdering Jews and destroying our country, then, there's no more gray area, sadly. But I believe that a grandfather my age in Gaza, who's not a member of Hamas, wants more or less the same thing for his grandchildren. And I just have to believe that, if the government of Israel and the people of Gaza have an opportunity to look each other in the eye, truly, without the flawed leadership on both sides, to be honest with you, then for our grandchildren, there might be a chance. Yes.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Our hearts are obviously with you and the safe return we are all hoping for of your son.
Thank you. I appreciate
you. Peace is desired for the future generations of children in Israel. A song by Paul Beckman, Polly Rainbow Song, created October 18th, 2023. Also the new and first leader of humankind in the free world. Peace is desired for the future generations. Peace is desired for future generations of children in Israel. One father who wants to get his son back, held hostage. Yeah, he's got a vision. Maybe children of parents now have seen devastation, but he hopes that future generations of children in Israel will have the experience of peaceful life there that will only know peace Peace and love, man. Peace. Peace and love, man. Peace. Peace and love, man. Peace. Future generations, yeah, you don't need to know all the prejudice and bias, hatred and other things, yes. All you need to have is a clean slate of growing up in a peaceful world, knowing only peace.